Hey guys, today we're going to be watching Why Was France So Ineffective in World War II? Animated History by Armchair Historian. Before we get into the history bit, if there are any audio issues in the video, I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure them out. I don't know why the past couple videos I've been recording have been having so many issues. So I use two softwares to record. One software I use solely to record desktop audio. So that would be the video audio as well as the video itself. So then I can, put it in its little corner. And then I use a second recording software for the camera and for my voice. But I also use it in a way, but for some reason, the one that records me and my mic picks up background audio a bit more. It used to not do that. I used to have it set up perfectly. I didn't touch my settings, but now it doesn't work right, and it picks up sounds it shouldn't be. I don't know why. I've tried to go through it, and I've tried to figure out why, but even when I change my settings, nothing changes in what it picks up. So I think the software that I'm using is just absolutely broken and is a piece of crap. For those wondering, the software that I use to record the camera and my mic, I use Streamlabs OBS. I use regular OBS just to record the video and the video's volume, or the video sound. I don't know why Streamlabs has turned to complete garbage in recent days, but it has, and is also one of the reasons why I haven't been streaming, because it would completely crash my stream without telling me or giving me any notifications of dropped frames or whatnot. So I don't know what to do. I'm trying to figure it out, but I have no clue what to do. It's absolute garbage. Anyways, enough of that. Let's go ahead and watch the video.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson.
Hello, Griffin Johnson.
The Armchair Historian. Today's video, why was the French military so preoccupied with eating baguettes instead of fighting the Second World War?
Before he explains, let me explain what I know. What I know is that France was ineffective because there was a laziness. You just want a huge war. So, you're going to be a bit cocky in yourself of your military's capabilities. The upper brass of France at the time also was pretty unwilling of change in a way. Also, they had a plan set in stone with the British in how they would defend against a German invasion. Well, they also, as I said before, they were not really willing for change and adaptation, which is what would screw them, because they would not adapt quickly enough to the invasion by Germany. So that's the quick run of it. The Maginot did what it was intended to do, which is funnel the Germans through one area. It's just that, well, the Ardennes was lightly defended, and the French wouldn't adapt their strategies to suit the needs that they were facing. They wanted to fight another trench war.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. More on that later. The swift capitulation of France in 1940 is often attributed to a surprise attack through the Benelux and left at that. But fewer people take a moment to consider why the French were so vulnerable to a surprise attack in the first place.
Not to mention also, following the war, unlike other countries, France's population really did not want to be in the military, right? Britain was more willing to remobilize when war was declared. Now, obviously, certain German bombings would, fuel passions and get the British people to wanting to fight. French, not so lucky. They had a smaller population than Germany. They really had not recovered from World War I still. And just the general feel of the populace did not want to be in the military, right? very oversimplified explanation of this.
Today we'll be discussing three major
And I'm not really much of a French historian, so, you know, my understanding is pretty limited.
reasons for France's defeat in 1940. Economic woes, increasing civilian control over the military, and a conservative military philosophy. We'll also evaluate German and French military equipment to decide whether the factor played a significant role in deciding the outcome of the clash between the
French military equipment actually was top of the line. France was actually the military power, I would say, before Russia. I mean, Russia wasn't even a factor in it, so really Germany didn't have to fear it. Hitler was more afraid of the French military. He felt that if he could take out the French, he could win the war, because the French had more modernized, at least at the time, the most modern, like heavy tank, or just tank. Can't remember if it was a heavy tank or just a tank. Their equipment also fairly modern. It's just getting said equipment to the troops, to the front lines where it is needed, I think was the issue. I think it was a very logistical and tactical failure. It wasn't a failure on the localized front, I should say. I think is one way to put it.
Let's begin by evaluating the state of the French army from 1918 up until 1936, a period characterized by a gradual decline in French military prowess. Immediately after the First World War,
as I stated a little
France
bit,
experienced a brain drain, with many rich, educated, and experienced officers resigning. This is not surprising, since such things happen after every war, but the French seem to believe that a lasting peace was finally reached, with many genuinely trusting that the League of Nations could prevent future wars. Massive military budget cuts ensued, and service training was gradually reduced from 3 years to just 1 year.
Wow, that is a huge cut. I know European countries still have mandatory military service. I know at least a few that do. Is France one of them? Someone let me know if France is one of them. I know Great Britain isn't, but I know Norway is. I'm not sure. I think Norway's the only one I know for sure. I don't know about the others, but yeah, most places where you have to serve in the military mandatorily, where it's mandatory, I think they make you stay for 2 to 3 years or something. So going down from that just to 1 single year is huge. Like 1 year isn't a lot of time to work someplace.
Cuts were largely the result of a dire economic situation. After the First World War, France was nearly bankrupt.
Yes.
And as a result of the Great Depression in the 1930s, it never really had the chance to recover. Just as the situation in France reached an all-time low, Germany was beginning to experience an upswing. Paul-Marie de la Gourse writes that, by 1936, the economic and financial situation of France had never been worse. These economic woes, compounded with Germany's resurgence as a major power, directly translated to France's sphere of influence diminishing as well. Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia, once allies and trade partners, now looked elsewhere. To make matters worse,
I didn't know that.
Problems of the French military apparatus were exacerbated by the civilian sector's increasingly tight hold on the army and bureaucracy. This was the result of a political chasm between the extreme left-wing Popular Front and the center-right coalition, with both sides trying to secure as many military positions as possible to forestall the possibility of one using the military against the other. In short, loyalty was prized over competence, so it was the bureaucrats who got...
Typically, as what happens and what proceeds to bring the downfall of a country when stuff like that happens, especially when political parties want to gain control of the military and use the military on the other side. That's never a good sign. Never a good sign.
As a result of having a non-military bureaucracy run by civilians with minimal military experience and an absence of experienced generals, the French military philosophy was fundamentally flawed. In the 1930s, the French constructed the Maginot Line on the Franco-German border as part of its defensive strategy. But F.O. Miksha put it best, stating that the Maginot Line was a formidable barrier, not so much against the German army as against French understanding of modern war. The line was hailed as impenetrable, but it was impenetrable in the same way that the Titanic was unsinkable. It had weak spots, and in 1940 Hitler's forces were able to breach the line through the Ardennes forest, since the French were of the mistaken conviction that the rough terrain would deter any German tank attacks.
Which, in defense of the French, is understandable. The Ardennes is a very tough terrain to go through. So, and the speed at which they move through, you know, they probably thought they'd be able to spot the movements of a large force moving through the Ardennes. Well, they didn't. But, you know, it's hard to predict that sort of thing, right? So even with, like, obviously with our modern perspective and our 2020 vision, it's hard to really blame the French for overlooking the defense on the Ardennes, because they needed to put their forces, the brunt of their military, their small military at that, on defending the lines that stretched through Belgium and through Netherlands, right? They needed to worry about those so that the Germans didn't break through in the north. So they had, of course, to put less troops on the Ardennes forest, where they thought it would be easily defended with a smaller force.
Again, the problem lies with military philosophy. Standard military strategy states that in order to win, you need a superior force. The French interpreted this statement to mean that they needed superior strength across the whole front line. The Germans, on the other hand, focused on bolstering their strength at one or two carefully selected points, and then launching an aggressive attack, using fast, light vehicles, dive bombers, and fighters all in unison. Now that we've compared French and German military philosophies, let's compare military equipment to come to...
That was a very quick description on German military philosophy at the time, which very understandable. The audience that he is kind of making these videos for probably already has a certain understanding on these kind of topics. I think nowadays, his newer videos, I think he would go into a deeper explanation, of course, because he's definitely gotten better. But yeah, this sort of video is more for people that kind of already have an understanding on what World War II was in the deeper levels of it, just based off of that really brief explanation on German military tactics, right?
To a conclusion about the extent to which it decided a German victory. One can make the assertion that French infantry was in some ways superior to German infantry. Not only did the French have superior numbers and supply lines, but contrary to prevailing thought, it was more motorized and outfitted with modern equipment than the Wehrmacht. Theoretically, French armor should have also enjoyed an advantage over its German counterpart. The French Char B1 bis heavy tank was virtually impenetrable from the front, and the Soma S-35, a medium tank, also had more durable armor than that of the German panzers. However, one could argue that Germany used its tanks more effectively.
Yes, it is not always the equipment. It's really all about how you use them, right? I think history has proven time and again in terms of military conflicts, the superior numbers and higher quality equipment isn't going to always seal the deal. I mean, you see that in Afghanistan with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 80s, 70s, one of those decades. You see it in the American intervention in Vietnam, even though a lot more Vietnamese would end up being slaughtered than proportionally Americans would be, right? Americans only lost like 50,000. The Vietnamese lost over 1 million. So, in a sense, in terms of death count, right? But in the end, the Americans still pulled out of that war. They didn't win. they didn't win the war. So, right? It's not always quality equipment and numbers. It's how you use it's how you use your stuff.
These tank battalions were composed of independent lightly armored tank divisions, and as previously discussed, their speed was harnessed
that's not I took some French and I still remember a little bit. There would be that's the misuse of the L, okay? If you're putting it in front of a G, right, you do either LE or LA. If it's feminine, la. If it's masculine, le. The L apostrophe is in front of a vowel. I know my French grammar a little bit.
The French. The Germans also employed wireless technology, each tank being equipped with radio receivers to relay and mobilize battalions at a pace that the French, who used flags instead of radios, simply couldn't.
Were they really using flags? When radio was a thing for like a while at this point? They were allies with the British. They had access to the most top of the line radios there were. What?
Couldn't match.
Jeez, France.
And as for the air forces of both countries, the French Armée de l'Air was at a disadvantage numerically, despite high levels of French aircraft production. This is because the French had very few spare parts for their aircraft, and consequently could neither prepare or repair their planes for service as fast as the Germans. Still, French fighters generally outperformed their German foes, with 2 German fighters being down for every 1 French fighter.
That's a good ratio.
We can see that France held a slight advantage when it came to their military equipment, but a poor military philosophy completely negated this advantage.
Yes.
It should not come as a surprise that this faulty military philosophy was upheld when one remembers the brain drain we discussed previously. At a fundamental level, what the French lacked was imagination, innovation, and a willingness to learn from the First World War. The French were rudely awakened from a dream of peace that lasted just a bit too long, having fallen asleep under the false sense of security provided to them by the League of Nations. Now on to...
Excellent ending analysis there and summarization of the points. Yeah, just the, I guess, events, right? The brain drain, the the misplaced sense of security in the League of Nations. Even though, you go back to that time period, you would, if you're a world leader and you don't want another war, you're probably also going to lean into the idea of the League of Nations, right? You're going to be hopeful in that the League of Nations is going to work and is going to make sure you don't have to lose another few million soldiers, a few million people to another brutal war, like the French suffered in the First World War. So it is understandable the decisions that were made, right? Like when we look at it with this context. And I think that's what's most important. I have nothing else to add. Remember to leave a suggestion down below as to what you'd like to see me react to next. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.